Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Robert Pelley, and I'm going to be teaching this class of macroeconomics for Fisk University in the summer school session. It's Econ 24001. And here is the book we're going to be using, Principles of Macroeconomics. As you can see, it's by Rittenberg, Grant, and Chathargian. Going to start out today. This is kind of the introduction to chapter 1, and going to talk about basically just what is economics. I can't even count the number of times that I've been to a party or been to a professional meeting or been in a group of other disciplines, and first thing when I tell them I'm an economist, they get this kind of glassy-eyed stare or deer in the headlights look. And finally, somebody will actually ask, well, just what do you do as an economist? And an economist or economics, it's an academic study of human behavior and social and cultural aspects. So economics, similar to psychology, political science, social work. It is a social science that deals in human behavior, especially when that human behavior is making choices. And if you think about it, we make choices every day. I got up this morning, my choice was go out and get something for breakfast or eat oatmeal instead. I decided to eat oatmeal because I had a lot of things on my plate I had to do today, and my time is valuable. So I decided to just stay at home and eat oatmeal. You may, as a student, have the opportunity tonight to read the lecture notes or to start reading on chapter 1. Instead, there's a fraternity party you want to go to, or you've got some friends that want to go downtown and hit the Nashville highlights and the night scene. So you have that option or that choice to make. So we are constantly making choices on a daily basis, whether the choices are based on monetary gain or money as the driver, or they're just based on human satisfaction and utility. Because economists describe utility, it's their best way, I guess, that you could say, to measure satisfaction or the benefit gained from consuming a good or service. So everybody has choices to make constantly. People, typically ask me, well, as an economist, what do you do? And so it's like, economics is typically, you can go in a multitude of different ways if you have a degree in economics. So they ask you, well, why in the world go economics? And it's fairly easy because I have kind of an analytical mindset, fairly decent in math, and that, I'm good at kind of playing the detective when it comes to an analytical role. And if you go the route of an economist, you can get into State Department work, you can get into welfare economics, you can get into resource economics. I'm particularly in healthcare economics. You can also on the agricultural side, and I've got experience with USDA as an economist. So there are just a lot of avenues as an economist that you can go in different directions based on the skill set or the human capital that you develop through your economic coursework or economic discipline. The economics classes are typically located in the business school, and they are because they typically go hand in hand with the business degrees. So graduate school at Ohio State, I was a financial economist. First 2 years, all of the students in accounting, finance, economics, public health, we all took the same core level classes in econ. And if you passed your qualifier after that couple of years, then you moved into focusing on what your, I guess, main interest was as being an economist. So that's why, again, it's typically in a business school, but you have a lot of of students from multiple disciplines coming over and taking those basic economic classes. As I said, economics, it's the measurement or the forecasting of human behavior, how people make choices. They're basically, and when you're making your choices, you're basically making these choices among alternative opportunities. As I said, stay home and study tonight, read your book, or you can go to the fraternity party, or you go party in downtown Nashville. You'll get up maybe in the morning and, for breakfast, do you make yourself a cup of coffee and, fix breakfast at home, or do you go to Starbucks and get, a cup of coffee? So always making choices on our daily lives. When it comes to kind of economics and the discipline of economics, there's basically two subsets. There's microeconomics and there's macroeconomics. This course happened to be macroeconomics, but we'll talk just a minute about microeconomics also, because micro comes from the Greek word that means small, whereas macro comes from the Greek word that means log or large. So if you're looking at microeconomics deal with individual decision making, maybe individual decisions of a firm, individual decisions of a group of firms in a particular area, all producing the same product. So when you make your decision about whether to go to Starbucks in the morning, that is a microeconomic decision. It's the decision that impacts your utility, your satisfaction of consuming that product that you get from Starbucks. My first job out of graduate school, I worked for the United States Department of Agriculture. I was an analytical economist, and I worked in the branch that talked about feedstuffs and cereals. And so my particular commodity that I was focused on was rice. And at that point, California was a huge rice producer in the United States. And I had to testify on multiple occasions before, House and Senate committees about the use of water, because water is a huge resource constraint on producing rice. So a lot of rice in California grown around the Sacramento area. And I was constantly being asked to come and talk to congressional leaders about what to do about the scarce resource of water in Northern California and how it was then going to impact the rice commodity and the rice growing. That was in our branch. Also in our branch, there were economists that were looking at corn and wheat and oats and barley. There was another branch that dealt with livestock. And so the microeconomic work that I did, combined with everybody in our branch, we looked at feedstuffs or cereal grains. And then if you looked at the USDA in totality, it looked at the aggregate of what was going to happen and how rice and the cereal grains and cattle impacted the total aggregate commodity. So it was moving in the direction of a macroeconomic situation, because they were looking at agricultural products in totality or in a whole. Typically, you think of microeconomics, typically think of macroeconomics as being more along the lines of inflation, of GNP, economic output, interest rates, foreign exchange rates. What's the balance of payments, and what's unemployment going to do to our economy as a whole. And if you turn on the TV today, what are they talking about? They're talking about national debt limit. They're talking about budget issues. They're talking about what's inflation doing to the economy as a whole and to the consuming public. And so those are what we typically think about when we're talking about macroeconomic situations. However, you can go back to the situation I had with Department of Agriculture, and USDA was looking at the total aggregate of all of the commodity prices and how it was going to impact the economy. Kind of moving on, a couple of things that economists really are concerned about is scarcity. And so, what is scarcity? Scarcity, it's as we make choices, we have to pick alternatives. And if we select one alternative, that means that alternative or that good and service can't be selected by anybody else, or it can't be selected at the same time as something else. And part of the problem with scarcity is just human nature. More is preferred to less. We have undesired or unfulfilled wants, and we can't fulfill those wants because of scarce resources. You have more wants than you have resources, and that really defines scarcity. Scarcity in resources, scarcity in assets. But when people talk about scarcity, it's unlimited wants and limited resources. If you read your book, they talk about a scarce asset. They are a scarce good. They talk about a public good. So a scarce good is generally one, as I've said, you can't use at the same time for a similar function. A free good is actually what they consider a non-excludable group. So a non-excludable good. So a scarce good is excludable. If I'm using electricity in my home today, then the neighbor down the street can't use that same electricity. If I'm using water out of the tap, that neighbor down the street can't use that same water out of their tap. That is an excludable good or an excludable asset. Where you talk about free goods or free assets, they're non-excludable. And really, there are very few of these free assets. The book argues air, gravity, those types of assets or those types of good or free assets or goods. The one thing the book doesn't mention is there's another group of goods that fall in here. And so you've either got scarce goods, you've got free goods, or you've got what I call public goods. They are goods that are provided by a government entity, federal, state, local, and they're provided to a population in that area, and they're driven by taxable dollars. So somebody has paid for those goods, you've paid for them, I've paid for them, usually comes from, sales tax, gas tax, property taxes, and there are things like street lamps, streets, sidewalks, national parks, lakes you swim in, public beaches, government, public goods. And the problem that you have with public goods, whereas a scarce good is usually driven by free market forces, public goods are a little different. How do you allocate public goods? Because you can't evenly allocate them simply because there's not a public goods to evenly allocate. So it becomes an issue with the public goods. Do you use a lottery? Do you use certain parameters? Medicare population, they have access to health care within certain guidelines and certain parameters. So when you're talking about public goods, it becomes a little difficult to figure out how to allocate those. When we're talking about, scarcity, and you'll hear this a lot as we go through macroeconomics, and as you take your microeconomics class, you'll hear it too. But what are the resources that impact decision-making people? You've got land, labor, capital, entrepreneurship. Let's think about Meharry, the medical center. They've got land, probably not much room for them to expand because of where it sits in Nashville proper. They've got labor. They've got a labor force that provides healthcare services to consuming population. So that's land and labor. You got capital. They have a certain, budget that they have to abide by. That capital can come from grants, from state funding, from federal funding. They have donors that may be providing capital. They have money coming through the door as they provide healthcare goods and services to United, Aetna, different health plans, Tennessee Blue. I think students at Fisk are covered by Tennessee Blue with their health plan. So they've got dollars coming in the door, but those capital dollars are they aren't unlimited. Your staff at Meharry or your labor force at Meharry is not unlimited because it's being driven by the capital dollars. And then finally, you've got entrepreneurship. And most people think of entrepreneurship as, that individual that goes out and develops a patent, starts up a small business, finds some way to generate dollars. And I agree with all of that. But to me, it's even more important with entrepreneurship because an individual that goes into an entity, whether it's a personal entity or a large organization, and can help improve efficiency and to improve strategy and improve processes, that is an entrepreneurship also. That's an entrepreneur also, and they are practicing entrepreneurship. Had an individual in a class I taught in the spring at Fisk, and that individual worked at Meharry. And he was working on one of the grants they had. I believe they provided goods and services to an HIV population or, population that were trying to kick the drug habit. But, and he would come in every week when we had a class and he'd say, what I learned last week in that health economics class, I finally figured out what's going on at Meharry. It finally starts to make sense. And by the time the class was over, he was in there redefining the processes that they went through to improve operational efficiency. So his company or the group he worked for received grant money and funding from the state. And again, constrained land, labor, capital, but they were becoming more and more efficient, providing services to more and more individuals because he and others were practicing entrepreneurship. They had that entrepreneurial capacity to go in and make change. So when people talk about scarce resources, a lot of people go land, labor, capital and stop. But to me, you need to make sure entrepreneurship is put in there because it's going to improve efficiency. And then when you're talking about economics, people will ask, just what is an economy? And an economy is an organization that produces a good or service, and that good or service is allocated across a consuming population. And whether it's Meharry or the local Starbucks or Fisk University itself, when you're going through the economy, they're asking questions. And those questions are typically how, what do you provide, how you provide it, for whom, and what provisions are in place for economic growth. So let's go through the what. So the what, let's say at Meharry, is they are combining scarce resources to provide medical services to a consuming population. So that's the what. That is the mission of Meharry, to provide healthcare services that are going to benefit their consuming population. Now, the what at Meharry gets a little complicated when they're looking at land, labor, capital, entrepreneurship, because they have scarce resources. They can't provide every service needed by the consuming population. Remember, it goes back to unlimited wants, limited resources. And that's what Meharry is faced with. So if they decide that they want to expand labor and delivery, and they have a constrained set of resources, where are they going to get the capital to expand labor and delivery? They're going to take it away from cardiology, take it away from orthopedics. They're going to take it away from the community clinics. There has to be a juggling act with that budget at Meharry for them to understand the what is to be produced. And then you've got the how. And the how really comes down is, what's the most efficient way to produce it? Is there something you can do to automate it? Or is it a manual process? If you listen to the news or read the newspapers, you hear all of this, talk about artificial intelligence and machine learning, and it's going to make things significantly efficient, and it's going to reduce the non-efficient workforce that we have. And that all may be true, but that is what a entity like Meharry is faced with, is how do they most efficiently provide that service to the largest majority of their consuming population. And then it's also for whom, how do you allocate it? Do you, Meharry is probably looking at, from a health plan perspective or from a healthcare perspective, they've got some commercial health plan patients, they've got some Medicare patients, they've got some Medicaid patients, they've got indigent population, they've got a residence intern teaching and research program that they have to keep funding and moving forward. So, for whom do they allocate these resources? And that gets difficult in a hurry. In the United States, healthcare is provided for the most part in a free market setting. It's not like the countries that have socialized medicine where they try to evenly distribute it in such a way that, I think at the end of the day, most people have issues accessing healthcare. Here in the United States, it's kind of a free market process. So, individuals pay for those services. You've got, as you say, the indigent population. So you've got a lot of competing consumers wanting to utilize these healthcare services provided by Meharry, but how does Meharry allocate those services across that population? And then lastly, it's, how does Meharry provide for continued economic growth? How do they continue to expand their services? How do they maximize that, land, labor, capital, entrepreneurship? So Meharry doesn't want to use up all of the resources they have in 2023. They want to save and conserve some of these resources. So they may take some of that capital and set it aside in an endowment that they can use X number of dollars over the years. Or they may have to go out and get additional donors to give them money. They may have to get additional grants from state and federal agencies. So Meharry is constantly faced with the what, the how, the for whom, and how do they continue to provide these services going forward. And then one last concept we're going to try to go through here with this first video on chapter 1 is we're going to look at opportunity cost. Again, you go back to the scarce resources. As you make choices, or as a firm make choices, or as a region of individuals make choices, how are the trade-offs among all of these alternative resources going to be managed? Because if you think about it, opportunity cost, it's typically thought of as the value of the next best alternative. A lot of people tie opportunity cost to money. It's not always tied to money, but you're looking at the value. What is the value of the option sacrificed? Because that is your opportunity cost. And you look at what would be the next best value of that opportunity cost. So when you're talking about money, you're talking about, let's go back to Meharry. Meharry, if they're trying to determine they want to focus on expanding labor and delivery, they have a set of physicians, they have a set of nurses, they have a set of support staff, they have some capital, they have some beds, and the opportunity cost of expanding that labor and delivery service to this consuming population is what are they having to forego? Is that bed that they are going to allocate to labor and delivery, would it be more of a value or more beneficial if it was allocated to cardiac orthopedic services? What about the nurses and the support staff? Would it be better off for the consuming population and more value if they allocated those nurses and support staff to a different area than they would if they allocated them to labor and delivery? So that's where you're talking about your opportunity cost. And again, that's where you're talking about opportunity cost in terms of money. So financially, you're talking about opportunity cost in that particular instance. But what if you're a student and this is the night before your midterm in this class, and there is a fraternity party that you want to go to, and you're faced with a dilemma because you're having to make a choice. You have a scarce resource, which is time, 24 hours in the day. So you can only allocate so much time to partying and having a really good time, and so many resources or hours in the day to studying. And from a utility perspective, where do you get the greatest benefit? And this is probably a really stupid question when you're a college student, because believe it or not, I was a college student at one time, and I was in a fraternity. And a lot of times I was faced with this same question is, study, go to the fraternity party. Go to the fraternity party, and let's say you make your choice and your decision is, well, I'm just going to go to the fraternity party for just a few minutes, and then I'll come back and study for my midterm tomorrow. And we all know what happens when you get to the fraternity party. You're having such a good time, you forget about studying, and you, unless you're just an extremely capable student, which I might not have been that extremely capable, but unless you're just an extremely capable student, it's really difficult to make a really good grade on that midterm. So that is another example of opportunity cost. Today, in the short run, it's not tied to money. Will it be tied to money in the long run? Maybe. If you don't do well on your midterm and you end up with a less than desirable grade in macroeconomics for this semester, and you're trying to get into medical school and you don't make it into medical school because you've got a bad grade in macroeconomics, then that does translate in the long run into money. So again, opportunity cost, not exactly tied to money all the time, but at the same time, while it may not be tied to money in the short run, it could be tied to money in the long run. So to kind of recap this particular video, we've talked about economics, talked about what, the study of behavior, the study of making choices, the study of it's a social science. So it's not like you're, a biologist or a botanist or a archaeologist. You're more of a social science, and you are studying human behavior. We've talked about scarcity. We've talked about land, labor, capital, entrepreneurship. We've talked about opportunity cost. We've talked about what is an economy. And then we'll try to wrap this up for this particular video. And then the next video, we'll start talking about, economic thought and what are the features of economic thought. Until then, don't forget to read the class notes. Don't forget to read your book. And enjoy campus life. You're only a college student once, so as long as you can keep your grades up, just ensure that you enjoy campus life. Until next time, have a good evening.